Hey everyone, welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. My name is Russell Martin and I am here with Brent Aiken and we are your hosts today.
Yeah, we are glad you're joining us today, and we hope that you find this conversation helpful, insightful, and encouraging as you lead your students in ministry. We wanted to stop and remind you about our social media. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Talk Student Men, and then you can also find us on our website, www.studentministryconversations.org.
Yeah, and if you go check that out, you can find all sorts of articles and posts and links to everything we have on our show notes. And we encourage you to go check that out. So today I'm talking to Kyle Creel, who's the host of the Small Town Youth Ministry podcast. And we talk about ministry in small churches and small towns, some of the struggles, some of the opportunities, and then how to adapt ideas and programs to work best with limited budgets, limited space, and other restrictions that may exist as we do ministry in small towns. So without any further delay, here is my conversation with Kyle Creel. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us. Welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. And this week we have a new guest, Kyle Creel, and we're talking about ministry in small churches and small towns. And so, Kyle, before we dive into that, just tell us just shortly a little bit about who you are, where you came from, and how you got here.
All right. Well, thanks, Russell, for inviting me on. I am about 15-year now youth ministry veteran. Just only youth ministry is the only thing I've ever done ever since I got out of high school and knew I had a calling on my life for a ministry. And I got to work side by side with my own youth pastor. And I was doing a little bit at home, an internship in my own church, then went to Bible college. And after I graduated from that, it was job pretty much immediately wanted me to come out. And so I traveled throughout the Midwest. I've been in the Midwest pretty much my whole life, from Oklahoma to Iowa. That kind of area has always been home. I like to tell people sometimes I've traveled up and down 35 more times than I can remember. It's pretty good drive. There's a whole lot of nothing on it, but it gets me to where I'm going. And just have been serving in mostly small to medium-sized churches is just kind of where God has put me. And then over the last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to pour into some guys in this community, and I was discipling them and getting them into ministry. And one of my most recent interns went overseas. He went to the UK for something for a year, and I didn't have anybody really filling in the next guy. Well, and I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing and pouring my time into helping, new leaders. And then about a year ago, God struck me with this podcast idea, and I really didn't know if I was going to go with it or not, because I thought, hey, every other guy in ministry has a podcast. And he's like, what do I really have to offer to anybody that's not already out there? And God said, there's a different message to small church and rural church youth workers, because not everything that they hear on these other platforms are things that translate into the world well. And so I just thought about it, and I was like, hey, God, if you have anything really worth saying through me, let me know at least 12 things that need to be spoken about, and then I'll pursue this. I know it's not just a silly thing. And I got those 12 things by the end of the afternoon. I was like, okay, I guess we're going with this. So this short form project has been something I've been working on, and just trying to equip small town youth workers, and I'm digging it. I'm loving it. And that is how actually Russell and I came across each other's podcasts, and we're here teaming up today.
Yeah. And it'd be fun to kind of be able to talk to some of your listeners, and you get to talk to ours and share some of those things. We're talking about the small town youth ministry, but specifically, we're going to get into how do you do programming for that, and how do you adapt some of those things. But for those who are listening and may not know what you mean by small town, because a lot of things are relative. So can you kind of describe what that means when we say small town youth ministry? What maybe some either funny examples? Like I know for me, I was in a small church, and the leading cause of a traffic jam was two trucks that wanted to talk to each other in the middle of Main Street, or a tractor with hay. What do you have, or how would you describe who we're talking to, like small town youth ministry?
Sure. Yeah. Let me tell you, the people the show is for is the ones who don't have a youth room in their buildings because uh, they're just kind of like an older building that hasn't been built with the next generation in mind. And so you're just a circle of metal folding chairs in your church basement. That's who we're here for. The ones who you don't have a Chick-fil-A in town, so you're always stopping at that every time your youth group takes a trip somewhere. And that's kind of church we're talking about. If your town's population is smaller than the size of an average mega church, this is the type of stuff that we're talking about. I would say if you've ever been late to a board meeting because the road was blocked by a tractor, the slow moving, yeah, that's the kind of small town stuff that we're talking about. Mostly, a lot of people I've talked to, your churches are definitely probably under 200. You may be a big rural hub church, where people come from all these surrounding farming communities, or maybe not. Maybe you're just your average Baptist, Methodist, whatever church, and you were brought on as a volunteer, a parent or a young person from the community, that they said, we'd like you to consider doing this because we definitely don't have the money to bring on staff a second pastor, who can focus on this, but we believe that you're a mature individual and we'd like to see you do that. And can you do it on a budget of $500 a year? Those are the type of situations where we're kind of talking about here today.
I remember my first church I went to. There was like 5 kids in the youth group, and my budget was basically also my salary. It was very 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 limiting because I basically used what I made to buy stuff for the youth group. But it was a joy. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it and loved it. What are some of the things that you have gotten some of the greatest joys that come from doing small church youth ministry in a small town?
Well, I would tell you that without unpacking it too much, because I don't want to like rob your time here. The smaller the community, I've sometimes seen a greater opportunity for the gospel to really speak life into some kids' lives. There's sometimes a large amount of poverty in small towns, in rural areas. In fact, after doing some research on the subject, realizing that it's actually statistically greater than in metro areas. It's kind of shocking. And there's just all sorts of kids who they need the fullness of the gospel. There are kids who thinks nobody loves them because dad's in jail and mom got them taken away because she's been doing meth and stuff, and so they've been living with grandma since they were 6, and they need to know that there's a God that loves them and wants a relationship with them, and that he has a plan for their life. They don't have to be stuck in that generational sin and the patterns that are going on, and that there's a place for them to belong, and it is the church. And even if it's just that group of kids playing like extreme duck duck goose, in the church basement in the circle of folding chairs, some cookies or something like that, that can be extremely exciting because all the kids have is staying at home and watching Netflix on really shoddy internet service that they can even get out in the country. There's sometimes not a lot of things offered to them, and they're just thirsty for something. And when a purposeful youth ministry can exist, you can have no shortage of kids to reach, and kids who can relate to the gospel message and really connect with it. And it's been a pretty cool thing that I have always been able to really interact with kids and do something I think is way better than just like fostering Christian culture. Like, I'm going to be honest. So I grew up in the suburbs at a, church where all kids came from kind of middle class, and healthy and families. And, we went to Winter Jam and we all knew about Veggie Tales and stuff like that. And sometimes youth group was just continuing that culture. And sure, we knew all the right answers on stuff, but these kids who know nothing about that, and we can just talk about real stuff that they need. It's kind of refreshing sometimes, and so it's its own mission field, its own really unique opportunity. At least from my experience, being able to serve in a couple of different churches in different states, I've seen some neat patterns. That's what I would
Yeah.
say. In short, in short.
No, and you can dive in on anything you want to dive in on. But I do think it's interesting you pointing out the difference between how the gospel is heard. And I've heard this with missions and going on mission trips and foreign countries and things, how the fullness of the
Oh
gospel is
yeah.
heard in different ways. But I had
Mhm.
never really I don't think I had tied that in as much. And many people probably haven't tied that in as much, even within our own states and even within different parts of our states, how that message of the gospel is good news is heard differently.
Yeah, actually, that idea came from a book that I can't quote, but one of our board members had shared with us at a board meeting, and it is very interesting concept. It's all truth. It's all what Jesus said, but some cultures, based on what they're struggling with, they hear different things that speak to them. All the different parts. It's like this multifaceted jewel is one way I've heard it put. That every time you look at it, there's something new and beautiful about the gospel, and we should really focus on each side of it, not just the get out of hell free card, which unfortunately sometimes is the majority of our youth and children's ministry.
Yeah. And when you do remember that book, just send it to us and we'll make sure and put that in the notes
Yes,
for
I'll
people to
text
have.
this afternoon.
That's
I'll
yep.
figure it out for you.
Yeah, no worries. So we talked about some of the joys and some of the refreshing things, but you don't have to go into a long list. But what are some of the struggles and challenges that may be different that you maybe surprised you? I know you've been doing it for a while, so it probably hadn't surprised you now, but even from your concepts and ideas, or that may surprise somebody who finds themselves called to ministry in a smaller church, smaller town.
Well, let me first say that remember, we're in youth ministry. There's always going to be something that's going to come up and surprise us. So I can't say that I'm not surprised by anything anymore. But I'll tell you, tying into what I already shared, that there's this, great harvest of potential for the gospel for these kids, at least the ones that we've been working with. There's I believe, a tie to poverty and a spiritual immaturity, or maybe I should say a biblical illiteracy. And so, in turn, while it's awesome to be able to have that blank slate, so I can just talk to kids, about real things, and there's no preconceived notions, that they got from somebody else that might be, we'll say, poor theology. That's a blessing because that's one less hurdle in the way. But on the other hand, man, they don't barely know their Bible stories at all, like outside of like Adam and Eve and the flood, and that Jesus apparently died and rose again. That's it. And so I remember just a couple of years ago, I was teaching for our Easter series that we were doing, and a main focus of the night, we were looking at where Barabbas gets off, and Jesus is the one who's condemned. And we all know this story, and we're familiar with it, but it was some of these kids hearing it for the first time. And there was a girl who was in her senior year of high school. So I would think at this point in time in their life, they'd be able to understand the idea of dissecting a story, looking for meaning and, parallels and stuff like that. And so I asked the question to her. I said, how are you and I like Barabbas? And the answer essentially is, well, I'm the guilty one that got off because Jesus took my place. Pretty simple answer, I would say. In my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that your standard kid could probably come to that conclusion, but she couldn't. She couldn't get that parallel at all. And it wasn't just because like this is the first time of her hearing the story. There was a lot of things I believe were tied into their socioeconomic status and how it changed the development and be able to critically think about things and find connections. And so sometimes that comes up and you get a little frustrated and you're just like, oh, so um, we got rid of some hurdles by eliminating any kind of theological preferences, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that we have to do just to get kids up to speed. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. Sometimes blessings, sometimes it's a little bit of pain in the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah. One of the other struggles that we had already talked about was programming and
Yeah, yeah.
how to do programming for smaller churches. And so I think one of the things I had talked before we recorded and in some of our previous conversations was that there are things that you can go to and you can see and you can read and stuff like this that are done by big churches. And
Hmm.
then there is uh, the challenge from that of one saying, you know what, we'll never do that, so let's not even try, or gleaning from that. I know you have some specific examples, but can you just take several minutes and talk about maybe some of the struggle of that,
Yeah,
not getting
yeah.
discouraged, and then also how do you make it work for you? So I'll let you just
Sure
kind of
thing.
go wherever you want to take it for a while.
Okay, I'll try to do my best without going off in a completely different direction or rambling. I'm a bad rambler. I'm sorry.
You're good. No worries.
So yeah, recognizing the limitations of that small town church youth leader, we definitely don't have the same resources as some bigger churches, and I'll get to that in a second. But I've often seen that sometimes we don't even have the same equipment, the same equipping as churches in more suburban city areas that are bigger and able to hire on full staff people. Like I said earlier, sometimes we have just a lot of volunteers, parents, or people who are even bivocational, and that is kind of like starting late sort of kind of feeling, or that you're starting with a penalty on you. And I just want to encourage those who might be listening, who are those bivocational or volunteer youth leaders right now. Real quick, before I get too deep in this, I'm going to tell you something that I noticed during a pattern in my life also, where I had to end up going bivocational for a little while. Um, I just salute you and I want to encourage you. The ones who are spending their breaks at work answering snaps from kids, or have to go back in Monday, even though you spent the weekend driving the kids to some conference like Dare to Share Ministries or something like that, and you've got to go back to your real job instead of taking a day off to rest. Those who they don't even have their own office space at their church, to work out of. Those who don't get to go get coffee with other youth pastors in your area to be able to be filled up. All of you who are pulling 8-hour days at a normal job, and then you go home and there's an angry message in your inbox from some parent that needs answering. I just want to first off tell you, I know you're at a disadvantage and you're just trying to serve with all your heart, but don't let anybody tell you that your ministry is less, that your ministry isn't really full time, because I know that your heart and mind is in it full time and you're just as important as everybody else. And don't forget that, because some of the struggles that we have we set up against ourselves mentally. First and foremost, know that you are awesome and we salute you. And I'm sure that Russell completely agrees on this.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, so I was in youth ministry as a youth pastor, and now I am a lead pastor at a church, but I have a bivocational youth leader. Great guy, does an awesome job. Hopefully, I'll have him on the podcast sometime. But either as me as a pastor or other pastors, and this is kind of something I'm just throwing at you, and I apologize for that, but what are some of the ways, the things that we can do? Because we're looking for those youth leaders, and whether it's a volunteer or a parent, and they have those characteristics or talents or gifts that you're going to talk about in just a minute, that I want you to kind of go through a little bit. But how can we, as a pastor, equip and support those bivocational pastors?
That's a great question. I would say that there's no cap on how much somebody can take with words and actual recognition from their leadership that they appreciate what somebody's doing, and encouragement. That's not going to get old, So for the leadership, just even show that they see you and the sacrifices you're making is extremely helpful. So I'd say that's probably number one. Number two is probably use your influence that you have as the leader to get them more volunteers. They're already doing this part time, and probably most of their energy is going into pulling off that Sunday night program, that Wednesday night program, and teaching or whatever. If you can take a little bit of your time to contact some elders in the church, or some parents and stuff, and be like, hey, I'm wondering if you can come up along behind Jason or Jenny or whoever your part-time youth leader is, and say, I would love for you to help them in the youth ministry in any capacity that they need, whether you're just picking up kids before a youth group and taking them home, providing the snacks each week, being there as a small group leader after he does the lesson, or and you're breaking into groups, because for them to have to hunt down people and try to get them, especially if they're going to face some dejection because some people are going to say, no, I'm too busy, that's not what they need to be spending their time on at all. So I would say encourage them greatly, do what you can to procure volunteers, and then maybe lastly, just kind of go easy on them. Sometimes they're going to make mistakes and not always have the time to clean up after stuff. And so, I don't know, this isn't like a real example from real life or anything, but if you should find a bunch of popcorn kernels left on the floor in like a nursery room where the kids from youth group had been watching a movie the previous night. And it's clear that this was probably just one mess that he forgot about in a grander scheme of things. Just get the vacuum out yourself and cover them. Don't let the Sunday school teachers eat them alive for how they trashed the room. Like recognize that they could always use somebody to just help them out when they drop the ball in minor ways. If they're doing something bad, like doing donuts in the church van on an icy parking lot, yeah, have a serious sit down. But little things, try to help them from getting the heat.
Well, one thing is we don't have that problem because we rarely have the ability to do donuts on icy conditions, although this past year we did. But and I also love that you have this book of fictional experiences that you can pull from for examples for your podcast. That's great. So that was a little bit of a tangent, but it kind of ties in. So I think you were talking about the leaders and kind of what they need as they come into this.
Yeah, I got off on that tangent. Just wanted to give props to those part-timers and volunteers. But another big struggle that they all face is that there might be a limit to what they can do compared to these big ministries. Maybe it's because there's not, a putt-putt go-kart place in your community, or anything big that the kids would see, a desired entertainment factor for. Maybe you want to go to those things, but it's a city that's an hour and a half away, and your Wednesday night, Sunday night program or whatever is limited. And so just like, well, if we're going to go do something cool, that's going to cut into our limited time, that we got to travel distance. So it cuts back on how often you can do some of the cool things. Or even if you're only a group of 5 and they say, oh, we'll get the group rate if you can get 12 or more, but it's like you can't get 12 or more, then it ends up being more your budget, asking more out of families. Sometimes you're just at a disadvantage because of where you are geographically, and that can really stink. So you try to figure out how to do it yourself, like the entertainment and the fun activities. What can you do instead of going somewhere else? And how can you pull it off in a way that's entertaining to kids on your very small budget or scale version that you're doing because your resources are limited?
So we've reminded people of some of the struggles and pointed some of those out. But so if I turned it off at this point, I may be discouraged, but I encourage people to keep listening because I would love for you to dive into, okay, so what can you do? I like how you put that. And I've told that with my church. I've moved from a larger church to a smaller church. And with COVID and everything, a lot of times no matter what it was, whether it was a pancake supper or whatever it was like, we can't do that because of this. And I've tried to change the conversation to be, what can we do? Even if it's only 50% or 60% or 70%. For example, we took the pancake supper and we ended up and did that as a drive-through. It wasn't what we were planning on doing originally, but we were still able to raise some money and to meet people and talk with them because we did it. It was probably about 70% of what we would have done. But we said, instead of saying, what can't we do or why we can't do it, say, what can we do? And so speak to those same youth leaders who are listening to this, who, may be thinking, well, we can't do this because we don't have enough money, or we can't do this because we don't have a van, or we can't do this because we can't do these. How do you make those things happen, even if it's not to the scale a large church would? How do you, in your experiences and even in your resources and your curriculum and all those things, what are some of those general ideas to do? And then I think you have an example of a Nerf war, share a little later. And then get specific, but start off general and then give us kind of a blueprint to how we could, somebody could take this and just, and write it down and make it happen.
Sure. Okay. So imagine that you're coming back from some weekend conference that you went to with the kids, and there was this breakout session for youth leaders, and they're talking about cool things you could do for youth ministry. And you're like, yeah, I admit those things are cool, but like I don't know how I can do that because I don't have all the same resources like space, facility, time, finances to pull it off. And you can get a little dejected on that, but we don't want to because we know that. We are able to do what God wants us to do. I would first encourage the person, Philippians 4:19, in case anybody thought I was going to go with a different verse right there. Philippians 4:19 says, God shall supply all your needs according to his glorious riches. And you have a brain, which is your number one ministry tool, by the way, to get creative with. It is not a big budget. And I'll say that again, your number one ministry tool is your creative brain, not a big budget. And so figure out what you can do. And maybe there's just some ideas like they're flowing around in your head that you are like, okay, I don't know why this would be fun, but what if we just made like 500 chicken nuggets and we had like a chicken nugget night and we get every kind of dipping sauce we possibly could, and then invite kids out, and we're going to have like just snacks and a game, like around this. And it's like, well, what would the game be? Like, is there a theme? Is there a something that we're going to like tie it into, like a devotion wise? Now, I'm actually referencing something that a friend of mine did for his youth ministry this last year. But he like had one crazy idea, or he saw somebody else do something. I think the inspiration event was that they were able to cater in Chick-fil-A where they lived, and bring that all in. He can't do that, but what he can do is get his wife and another volunteer from the youth ministry to make a bunch of those dino chicken nuggets, by Tyson's, and warm them up in their own ovens and transport them to the church location in roasters, and that they're going to ask the local, restaurant for donations as far as the little dipping sauce cups, and they're just going to go to town with what they can. And they're going to continue to like fill in the blanks by thinking like, okay, what could we do? This idea process is something I actually saw really spelt out pretty cool in a way that I was at a conference this last year, and somebody had named their conference "Learning from the Imagineers," I think is what it was called. And there's probably a book that they had got it off of. But if you're not familiar, Disney World, Disneyland, they have all sorts of creative engineers that push technology and the experience further for people by finding creative ways to do new things, especially when it comes to the latest movie or property that they have. I would encourage, you can watch some of these people in real time by watching some documentaries that are on Disney Plus about the people who work there and the cool things they bring to life. But they apparently supposedly have this process as they're trying to come up with stuff. And I'm going to sum up like 5 steps of this process for you real quick so you can think about how I might do a cool event. The first step is called blue sky. That's just like the daydreaming, like what if we could do something, like just thinking about all possibilities. And then step 2 is concept, like drawing something together there and being like, well, what if then, with chicken nuggets, we made it, a smorgasbord with every sauce, imaginable. And then number 3 is this feasibility step, like poking holes in it. Like, okay, well, that sounds cool to have a chicken smorgasbord, but how are we going to do it, when we only have one oven at the church, or that we have to figure out like how we're going to serve it all in a way that is not dangerous in this time of possible cross contamination. And you want somebody purposely looking for the hard parts, just calling it out, so that you can go to the 4th stage, which is talking about the real design that you can pull off, and even like reimagining. Now, when you get there, you might end up going all the way back through this first 4 steps again. It's almost like the circle, because you're going to go through these phases where you can figure out what you can do, and so just like, well, now we're going to continue to imagine, but we've got to think about how we're going to do it. And the concept changes just a little bit. And we go back to that feasibility step. And we're like, okay, actually, there's only one more problem that we have to deal with. And then you're designing based off that until you think you've got something. You can continue to go through those steps until finally you got a plan. And then you go to the production step or construction steps, like making it happen, actually setting up for the event. So I'll just kind of repeat those real quick. So anybody who might be taking notes, might want to think about these for their own event planning. You got your dreaming concept, or not concept, sorry, you got your blue sky step. Then you got this concept that you're pulling from it, like something you would like to do and pull off. Then you got that feasibility step, like poking holes in things. And then there's the designing, reimagining step. Those are the 4 that you might go through multiple times before you actually get to production / construction. So like, you brought the Nerf war thing that I had said earlier. I'll give you like my walkthrough of this. In bigger cities, they have these like laser tag arena places that you can take your youth group to, and there's all sorts of awesome bunkers and things for you to hide behind, and it's a wild time. And it's like, wow, I wish we could take the kids to a laser arena thing, but for me to load up all these kids on a bus and go an hour and a half away just on one Wednesday night, and the cost that would be, it's like that's something I can't do. But I got this concept like, what's next to laser tag? What about Nerf wars, where kids are coming in and we're shooting Nerf darts and we're still doing, capture the flag and all these kind of things. Like, okay, that could be cool. Oh, but wait, we don't have, a youth room to do this. And where can we do this? Now, in my church, we don't have a sanctuary area that has got pews. It's just all open with chairs. And so we're like, okay, what if we turn the sanctuary area into this Nerf War stadium? Well, we don't have a lot of money to buy, inflatable sort of things. How are we going to get around that? It's like, what if we take that Gaga ball pit that we have that like is kind of standing fence? If anybody doesn't know what Gaga ball is and you're in youth ministry, I apologize. You haven't heard about this trend yet. Just go Google this. Okay. It's great. Your kids have probably even played it at summer camp. And we had built our own Gaga ball pin. It's like a hexagon sort of kind of thing. Anyway, but they're like, hey, we do have this. What if we set those fences up and we like drop like some ghillie netting or like tarps down, like cheap stuff to be able to make these things that kids can hide behind and pop up from behind. And we're going to collect cardboard boxes and kind of build some walls, and some fun barriers and just repurpose whatever we can. So we have these two sides of a battle zone, and it's like, all right, that would be cool. But how are you going to have all of these kids show up, with enough darts? And we're like, we're not. We're going to order this brick of 500 darts from Amazon, from like the Chinese, like knockoff brand company, because we don't have money to buy the real brand ones. But we just got 500 darts for like only $20. And we just have to, order and expect that it's going to take 3 weeks to get here instead of 2 days. But now we're seeing this thing starting to come together, and we start advertising this, and the kids are like, Nerf War, I want to come to that and invite my friends. And it ends up being like our number one event of the year. Like in actually 3 years in a row, this is the night more than any other that we have more kids show up, all because we're like, hey, let's try to do something crazy. How can we do this? What do we need to do to make it happen? Is it the same thing as the laser tag arena? No. And I'm like just barely getting by with like a single black light and like turning some like techno music on, in the background. And I'm not trying to be exactly like the laser tag arena, but I am trying to kind of deliver the experience. And the kids love it, and especially when you leave them wanting more. It's like after we only do 45 minutes of games, they're begging to do more. But it's like, hey, we got time for a quick 10-minute devotion. Your parents are going to be here, and you guys should come back next week because we're going to do something else. And they're excited about it. And kind of to go back a little bit to what I was saying earlier is like when these kids are starving for something, if you're in a small community that they don't have there, it doesn't matter if you think you're this rinky-dink rip-off operation. The kids are going to love it and they're going to be excited about it. And you should be proud of what you're able to make happen. And that doesn't matter if it's you don't want to do a Nerf war, but I will tell you there's some great, awesome tips on doing that. You can easily pull off a Nerf war event for under $50 on our link tree for the podcast. I'll plug later. We have a document that's called 10 cheap or free events that you can do with your youth. And there's tips on there like how you pull off a Nerf war for the youth group, or a fun games night. A thing that I did once was I turned the hallways of the church into a 9-hole putt-putt course. And it was the most jankety looking thing, but the kids loved it, and it's just like, you don't have to be the professional place. You can be your own version of it and still have success. So I'm going to pause there because I really don't know if I'm going beyond where we originally talked about.
No, that's good. And I wrote a couple of links down. So I have on another website I did, I have a links for Gaga Pit to build your own, some simple plans for that, and for the Nerf war that we did. And then we'll also make sure and put your link for your 10 cheaper free events for youth group. I think that would be awesome and usable. What's great is, you don't have to even be a small church to just do a Nerf war. I mean, that's conversely, we can take ideas from larger ministries and make them happen in small churches. But there's also a lot of things that happen in small churches that a larger church or a small group or a junior high or senior high or whatever like that can utilize some of those ideas as well. So I think just the ability to know how to scale up or scale down whatever it is that you do is helpful. We did one of our biggest events that we did was Winter Olympics, and this was, when the Winter Olympics kind of came out the year I was started with my youth group, and so we got the automotive dollies that you roll under the cars with.
Okay.
And we set up cones, and we did the luge, and so they had to lay on their stomach and push themselves through the luge. They did bobsled, so one person pushed them through that. We did figure skating, and they had 1 minute. They didn't know the song. They had 1 minute to create a routine on the spot, 1 minute playing the song while they danced in their socks and did their figure skating routine. We did biathlon where they skated around. So the deal was we used pieces of paper, and you had to keep your feet on the paper so you couldn't run. So you had to slide on the paper all the way through. So we did like skating. And so skating, you couldn't pick up your feet. You had to slide, but they slid all the way down to a point and came back, or did the biathlon or whatever, the one where they ski for a while and then they shoot.
So like they stop and they pick up a Nerf gun and have to shoot over like a pile of Solo cups. Okay, you've already like made my games for February happen this winter with the 2022 Winter Olympics, man. Thank you.
So definitely. And I will again put that link because everything we did was fairly simple and could be easily adapted one way or the other, because a lot of times you're just scaling for size. A lot of times
that's the perfect way to sum it up.
And so I'll also share, we have an Angry Birds deal on there too. So how to do life-size Angry Birds, which we originally did from, they'd done it on, Kenny and Elle Campbell had a games website. They do Grow Curriculum, but they had a games website to begin with. And so we got it from there. And so I can link both of those. I think my link goes back to theirs as well. And she's actually probably before you. We have a conversation with her on volunteers and finding volunteers in youth ministry. So I think that's in podcast time will be before you, but we'll actually post that up next week.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell your listeners, if for some reason they listen to me before they listen to Elle, like they're like youth ministry gurus. Go listen to that episode.
So it'll be up, but what's nice about this is everybody has different things they share. And so the original idea of doing this was that everybody's going to have something that they know that they can share that's going to be different, that's going to reach out to somebody. So yes, I encourage people to listen to Elle or Marco Stryker, but I also encourage them to listen to me and to you and to those who may not have a name or a book or something like that, but you've already shared some highly valuable stuff that I think is going to be very, very helpful for our listeners. So I do want to wrap up and not take too much time on this, but what else would you share? Any other thoughts that you haven't shared about doing youth ministry in a small church? Struggles or positives, or just anything that you would want to tell our listeners before we start to close out?
I would say that we don't need to talk about the struggles. If you're listening to this and this relates to you all, you already know them. So I only want to try to fill you up and encourage you and recognize some of the blessings that are within your current calling and where you're at. On the Small Town Youth Ministry podcast, we try to just focus a lot on subjects that, as the small and rural area church youth worker, you experience, you live. And so that's why we spent a whole episode just talking about ministry envy. There's plenty of things that you can be envious about that church, in the next town over that's way bigger than you, and you let that into your heart. It can be really bad. But one thing that you should recognize is they've got their own set of struggles. And in where the place that you're at, you have some beautiful things available to you that person at the big church is probably just drooling over. Like the fact that you probably don't have any other ministries that you're really fighting with about sharing spaces or like who does this thing belong to. It's like I remember growing up in my larger church, and this space that was in a particular wing that the youth ministry met out of, that had to be like fought over with another couple of ministries, and then who's touching whose stuff and all that kind of stuff. It's just like some people from these bigger churches, they would be happy to have to deal with those sort of things less, or did not have to be like roped into a bunch of extra things because you guys have such a large staff. And so someone assumes and supposes and expects that you're able to pull off some kind of giant thing. But here it's just you. That's all there is. And so you can immediately say no to these ridiculous events that people want to do because you have an easy out. It's like, we're not big enough to do that. So we're going to pass on your like concert event that you're wanting to do and, have us try to host, it's just like, sorry, XYZ Ministries, but you might want to try big church in the next town over. You have these glorious like outs that they don't. They have so much more expectations on them. And if I'd say one more thing, by the way, if you're at a small church, your food is always better when it comes to potlucks.
Amen.
Sister Susie, her cheesy potato funeral casserole, the one with the special K crumbled on top, is like, I don't know what you call that, but it's like that she brings to every single potluck, hands down, that stuff is better anytime than any catered food that a large church brings into their events. You've got so many blessings around you that these other churches don't have. Look around, recognize them, celebrate them, and know that even though you don't have what somebody down the street has, you have so many great things, and know that God has given you what you need to successfully pull off ministry.
Awesome. Well, Kyle, we're wrapping up, but can you let us know, let our listeners know, how do we get a hold of you? Maybe tell us a little bit. You've told us a little bit about your podcast already,
Sure.
but maybe tell us just a little bit more about that, where they can listen to that. And also, if someone has questions or wants to talk with you, how can they do that as well?
Sure thing. Well, first off, the name of the podcast is the Small Town Youth Ministry Podcast, and it is available on all the major podcast places, especially on Apple /iTunes, whatever you call it, Spotify, and apparently Amazon has just started up a podcast platform. And I just got the confirmation email before we recorded this episode that we're now also up on Amazon's podcast platform. But you should be able to find us in all the major places. And we also have 2 social media accounts to help kind of spread the news. One is Instagram and one is on Facebook that just spreads the word about the latest episodes that we're getting ready to post and resources that we're giving out. And they both have links pinned to the top on them or in the bio of our link tree where all of our resources are available that we just give away to you guys because we love you. But if you're wanting to get in contact with me, I totally encourage you to email me directly at our email, which is smalltownyouthmenpodcast. And so men is MIN right there in the middle, smalltownyouthmenpodcast@gmail.com. And I'd love to collaborate with you guys and just hear your stories.
Well, Kyle, thank you again for this. And I hope we'll have conversations in the future. But for now, prayers for you, for your ministry and in your church, and also in your podcast as you continue to pour into the lives of others. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Russell.
All right, that was great. Hey, thanks everyone for joining us today. We hope you were encouraged and inspired by this week's episode and that you found tools that you can use as you pour into the lives of your students.
Yeah, as a reminder, if you found this helpful, we ask that you would leave a comment or a rating on whatever platform you listen to it on, and also maybe let someone else know about this conversation. Just take a moment and share this with them. Tag them on social media, and make sure and tag us at Talk Student Men on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Well, that is this week's episode, and we are glad that you joined us. But we want to let you know, go back and we have about 18 other episodes that we've done. The Future of Youth Ministry with Brock Morgan, Retaining Youth Through College with Cheyenne Fenty, Speaking to Students with Kate Garnes, Enneagram in Ministry with Jen Whitmer, How to Develop as a Youth Leader with Mark Ostreicher, and last week's episode, Volunteers in Student Ministry with Elle Campbell. So many episodes, so many opportunities for you to go and listen and grow and continue to grow as a student leader. So with that, we look forward to our next episodes coming up, and we hope that you will join us next time.